Okay, great to have you. Now, I'm going to show you a video. It's 2 minutes long, and I have posted it on my my Facebook page for the last week. And I posted it because I just love this video. It's about 2 minutes long, and it's by a preacher, Scottish, I believe his background is, and you'll hear the accent. But his name is Alistair Begg. And he gives this 2-minute story, which is so perfectly done. I want you to see it as something we can aim for. Now, when we are done with this video, we're going to break into groups, and we're going to try to give a 2-minute story each. And if you notice, you were given a piece of paper coming in. And then you'll notice around the room that there are chairs pulled to the side, and there's one piece of paper on these chairs, and that is where your color group will meet. Now, don't be intimidated by this. The goal is very simple. Just tell a story, but your goal is 2 minutes or less in your story, and it can relate. You can retell a Bible story. You can tell David and Goliath. You can tell how you came to faith. You can tell how you fell in love, whatever story you want. But here's the secret. It's got to be under 2 minutes, or else we're going to be way off track. So the reason I'm showing you this video is, number one, this is the way to do it. And number two, it's giving you a time parameter, how you can be effective in telling a story and causing people to say, oh, yeah, I get that. So let me just give you a little lead in. This is a clip that's part of a 40-minute sermon, but it's only 2 minutes in that. And Alistair Begg is wanting to convey the power of the gospel, the fact that we don't work our way to heaven. That it's not about the things you do. It's about what Jesus did for us. And he's telling the story of the thief on the cross. So I want to tell you that, so when he starts talking, you already know what he's talking about and get the feel for what is happening. So you ready? Here we go.
Think about the thief on the cross. And what an immense, I can't wait to find that fellow one day to ask him, how did that shake out for you? Because you were cussing the guy out with your friend. You've never been in a Bible study. You never got baptized. You didn't know a thing about church membership. And yet you made it. You made it. How did you make it? That's what the angel must have said. You know, like, what are you doing here? Well, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Well, because I don't know. Well, you know, excuse me, let me get my supervisor. They go get the supervisor ranger. So, wait, just a few questions for you. First of all, are you clear on the doctrine of justification by faith? The guy said, I never heard of it in my life. And what about, let's just go to the doctrine of Scripture immediately. This guy's just staring. And eventually, in frustration, he says, on what basis are you here? And he said, the man on the middle cross said, I can come. Now, that is the only answer. That is the only answer. Think about the thief on the cross.
That is what I would argue one of the most perfect examples of storytelling in a sermon. Now, that's a sermon. We're not talking about you're talking to your grandkids or, things like that. But what I want you to think about, now this is what I put on this, first line here, is what are your impressions of the Alistair Begg video. Now, if you want to find this video, it's not hard. You can just type in Alistair Begg, Thief on the Cross, and, YouTube. You can go to my Facebook page and you'll see it, and you can share it yourself in terms of that. You can listen to the whole sermon on YouTube. But what I want you to see, did you notice when he's talking about the first angel and he's going, his facial expressions, his hand movements, perfect. I mean, it's drawing you in. And then when he, brings in the second angel, and the second angel, the supervisor, is saying, what do you feel about the doctrine of justification? What do you stand on the doctrine of Scripture? Just that little hesitancies, the little stuttering as he's going through it, and then coming to the point that he wants to say, the man on the middle cross said I could come. The first time I saw that, I cried. The second time I saw that, I cried. The third time I saw it, I cried. I am now seeking to keep myself together, having seen it now, numerous times. But that is what is the quintessential goal of storytelling. You're introduced to a character, the thief on the cross. We are then brought to sub-characters, the angel and the secondary angel that comes in. And then we're into this tension. How did you end up in heaven? And then the punchline. And you stand back and you go, woo. Here I've been laughing at the first part of the video, and I go from laughter to, wow, this is me. And that's the way you want it to be. Now, I'm not Alistair Begg. You're not Alistair Begg. This guy's been doing it a long time. Plus, you got that Scottish accent going, and, we can't compete with that. It's just, like, really great. Okay, I found this little picture on the internet, and I found it funny on a number of levels. Now, it says on it non-HDHD storytelling, and it says start of the story, end of the story, nice straight line. And then it says, ADHD storytelling, and you see pre-story prologue for context, start of story, too many details, what was I talking about, lose train of thought, all these kinds of things. Now, I think it's funny that it attributes this to ADHD, but I think anyone can go on this circuitous route in terms of our ability to tell a story. But if you think about storytelling from your perspective of what you've come to encounter, my guess is you have had images growing up in which you gained insight as to storytelling. Some of us, those images were not effective, not helpful, but others, they were very powerful. I saw the movie, I guess it was 4 years ago, Tolkien, and it was about J.R.R. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings fame. And in the movie, they showed his mother telling stories to him as a little boy. And the mother was, and then the dragon jumped out from the forest. And, it's expressive, and you see the kids, moving in expression. And when I saw that scene in the movie, I realized that's my wife. That's the way she told stories to our kids. And so I asked her this week, where did you learn that? Because she would be reading a book. She didn't write the story, but she's telling it in such a way that you wanted to be sitting there listening to it because it was so powerful. And she had different voices. So when the dragon is speaking, she sounds one way. When the lion is speaking, she sounds another way. When a guy is speaking, when a female is speaking. And she said, that's an interesting question. She said, at that time, I was starting to listen to books on tape, back when we had tape recorders. And when I would listen to these professional readers, I would notice you could have a woman, female reader, but she handled the male voices, she handled the female voices, you handle the children voices, you handle the old person voice. Because all we have in that context is our voice. And so you're needing to create word pictures using our voice. And then if you're physically present with somebody, like she was with our children, then you can lean in, you can modulate your voice, talk, and then it got very quiet. And before you know it, you are becoming a good storyteller. Now, when it comes to people who do this professionally, there is a very simple principle, and this is your first fill-in here. A story is more than information. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Otherwise, it is just information. To use the Alistair Begg example, the beginning is the thief on the cross goes to heaven. All right, what are the implications? The middle section is the tension. What are you doing here? And the closing, of course, is the man on the middle cross said, I could come. That is exactly what we're looking for. Now, as I am a preacher who's been preaching a long time, one of my jobs, like when I am not preaching, I visit all the campuses, if I can, and I evaluate our preachers. I don't evaluate Pastor Henry. I'm smart enough not to evaluate my boss. But I do listen to everyone. So if Pastor Leslie's preaching, I want to hear what she did. JC preached here last week. He hasn't preached much in Syosset. I want to give him feedback as to what I thought was good, what I thought could be improved. Pastor Nathan preached last week. I wanted to, give him feedback. But here is, I would call it a rookie mistake, is you give information, but it's not a story. And in your mindset, you think you've given an illustration. And on one level you've given a boring illustration. Because here's what a boring illustration looks like. I was driving on the LIE and someone cut me off. And that put me in an attitude of, and then so you continue your sermon. You gave us information. You were cut off on the LIE. A story would be, I thought it was going to be a good day. I got onto the LIE, and lo and behold, no surprise, somebody cuts me off. And for the rest of the day, I had this bitter attitude. Now, what I've done is I built up to it a little bit. I tell that I was cut off, but then I told its implications. Now, I would still call that a weaker illustration, but my point being, just ask this question. Does it have a defined beginning? Is there a middle part to the story? And does it wrap up in a way that is helpful as to why I told the story? And one of the greatest ways you can learn storytelling is read your Bibles. When I took Judaic studies at Stony Brook University, so I'm learning from rabbis, one of the books we were required to read was entitled this, He Gave Us Stories. This is a rabbi speaking. And anyone who has perused the scriptures knows it is filled with stories. And so why are we not using these stories or this style of storytelling in our own lives? Here is a great, great one. Let's see if anyone can figure out where it is by the scripture reference. It is 2 Samuel chapter 12. Anyone know what that story is? All right. So chapter 11 begins, in the time that kings go off to war, David stayed home. He gets on the roof of his palace, and he sees a beautiful woman bathing, and you know how the rest of the story unfolds. Probably most of you do. He ends up arguably a rape and a murder. Chapter 12, he gets a visit from the prophet Nathan. And now do you remember what Nathan said? There was a man who had a little ewe lamb. He loved his lamb. He loved it so much it ate from his table. And it was like the family, member of the family. There was a neighbor, a very wealthy man, had thousands of sheep, but some visitors came. But instead of sacrificing or cooking one of his own lambs, he went to that poor man and took his ewe lamb and served it to his guests. David's response was, justice! This has to stop. I mean, he was passionate. And then what does Nathan say? Here's the punchline. You are the man. It's the short story. I mean, to read the whole thing, 60 seconds at most, and yet cut to the heart. That is the power of great storytelling. Now, in fairness to Nathan, he had a God-inspired, story that he was telling. But many cases, so do you. And let me give you an example. We're going to end our time today with this. But the greatest story you can tell someone else is your own story of how you met Jesus. This is an example of a story that you can get down right. Add the tension. Add, where you were, what you were feeling, what emotions were going through you. Get rid of the rabbit trails that don't contribute to, the story. And before you know it, you're in an elevator going up to the 60th floor in Manhattan, and somebody said, you seem religious, Frank. What's your story? And Frank's ready to go. He's got 2 minutes to tell him how Jesus got a hold of his life. And by the time the door opens, the other guy is like, wow, Frank, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that. And then he ponders it the rest of the day. Great storytelling. So let's look through these principles that we showed. So storytelling principles. The first one is this: where are you going? Where are you going with the story? What do you want to be the plot line? The reason multiple reasons I showed you the Alistair Begg story, because I'm able to refer to it. But where was Alistair Begg going the whole time? There is no way you can get to heaven outside of Jesus Christ. That's it. There is no extra thing. And he goes on in his sermon to talk about every day I need to depend on the gospel. It is never about me. It never was about me. It never will be about me. It's always been about the guy on the middle cross. And so he knows where he wants to go. If you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. That's what it comes down to. So Spurgeon, famous British preacher, was once asked, how long does it take to you to prepare a sermon? He says, well, it depends how long you want me to speak. He said, for example, if you want me to speak for 5 minutes, it's going to take me a good 8 hours to prepare. He said, if you want me to speak for 30 minutes, it's going to take me about 4 hours to prepare. And if you want me to speak for an hour, I'm ready to go. Now, why he's saying that is because that hour sermon, he's going to meander around. He doesn't know where he's going to land. I visited another church. I'll leave it nameless. But I like the pastor, good guy. In fact, we went out to lunch afterwards. But when I heard him preach, he said, as the worship team comes forward, because he's going to be wrapping up. And then he spoke for another 8 minutes. So the whole worship team is kind of like, just waiting for the guy to end and move on. And so he wanted critique of his sermon. So I gave it to him gently. But I said, what was the deal of calling the worship team up and then talking for another 8 minutes? It felt like to us that the plane was circling, waiting for the runway to clear, that you can, finish. And he told me, he said, you're absolutely right. I knew it was happening at the time. But as he got back, when he was ready to, finish, he sees somebody like in the fourth row who he didn't know was in the service and needs Jesus. So he kind of gave an 8-minute sermon just for the friend that he saw sitting there. And he's like, I need to talk to him. So he just continued speaking. And I see that. I get that. But those are the kinds of things, if you know where you're going, you can get there. But if you don't know where you're going, you will meander. And our goal is to be good storytellers. You have to know a little bit about where you're going. Next one, voice inflection. Who is talking? How do they feel? Should we care? Who is talking? How do they feel? Should we care? Again, use Alistair Begg. We can tell immediately that the angel, the first angel, is bewildered. I mean, the inflections, the sound, you made it. You made it. I mean, perfect. Sometimes we are timid to use voice inflections because we think we'll sound corny or something like that. The bottom line is take the chance, because other than that, you become a monotone bore. And if you're talking about something of value, you don't want to bore people. You know, there are so many times I have been of the distinction of where I think to myself, I'm going to embarrass myself tomorrow morning when I preach. If I tell this story, I'm going to embarrass myself. And you know what? I think the enemy can use that, particularly when you're talking about things of faith that are important. One time, this is very early in my ministry at Shelter Rock, I was trying to make it convey how we bear fruit as Christians. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you abide in me and I in you, the same bringeth forth much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Anyone know where that's found? John 15. So I wanted to point out that it is abiding in Christ that produces fruit, and that this is not striving. It's like I'm not trying to whip myself into abiding into Christ. I'm hanging out with him. How do I hang out with him? I read the scripture. I listen to Caleb. I talk about Jesus when I'm hanging out with people. That's abiding with Jesus. So I said, this is what I did in my sermon. It's not like the vine is going, boop, fruit appeared. So one of my pastors comes up to me afterwards. He hasn't worked for the church for a very long time. He said, you looked like you were having a bowel movement on the stage. Now, is that a thing that you would like to look like when you're on, you're preaching? No. And I was immediately feeling maybe I need to pull back. Maybe I shouldn't be so expressive. Quite honestly, I think that was a feeling from the pit of hell. Because if we are going to be interesting, and by the way, sometimes you can go over the edge and it feels corny, or it doesn't. But too often, it's the opposite. We just didn't try to tell a story in a way that makes it pop, in the way that draws people in. And so even if your inflection is not awesome, still do it. You know what's so funny? My kids, having my wife read The Lord of the Rings to them, long book, and my girls couldn't wait to hear her read each night. When the movie came out, it was almost like disjunctive that Frodo didn't sound like my wife's Frodo. It's like, but, because she did it so well, and she remembered what Frodo sounded like each time she returned to the passage. Or when Gandalf is speaking, and, she had a Gandalf voice. That is, if a story is worth telling, it is worth telling well. And this gets back to, should we care? And one of the reasons that communicates care is that you have worked on it a little bit. You have crafted this story a bit to see what you could do. Which brings us now to the next, which we've talked about a little, body engagement. Pay attention to what you are doing facially, breathing, leaning, movements to contribute to your story. Here's the thing, for those of you who've watched me preach, a number of years, when I want to convey that I am cocky and self-assured, I put on this swagger. Lord, what do you expect? I'm a great preacher. People laugh, they find it funny. And people who've seen me preach for a while know, oh, he's in a swagger mode now. He's doing his thing. And it becomes a bridge to not only what I'm saying, but to find a break in the talk, because it's funny, or, he's doing that way. All those kinds of things contribute. breathing is an important one, and sometimes you have to practice your breathing in advance because you want to have that pregnant pause. You're wanting it to pop when you say this. Sometimes you're wanting to get loud suddenly because you're wanting to, like in this particular talk, this scene here of Alistair Begg is when he's saying, "You made it! You made it!" He's raising his voice, the inflection is there, and it's effective. Now, I like watching the guys behind, when he's speaking, because some of them remain like stoic the whole time. They're like holy pastors. They can't laugh. But others back there, they're like funny. I mean, it's funny. They start laughing with it. And that is, when you're speaking, you look forward to that. By the way, another trick to speaking is somebody made a comment, "Why do you always point out Keisha in my sermons?" That's Keisha over here, right here. Raise your hand. It's because she's expressive, and sometimes if I am feeling my sermon is like, crashing, I'll look at the amen corner and I will feel strength again. Yes, I need that sometimes. I need that. But in any storytelling, look for the person that seems to be getting it. And that's going to help you in speaking because they're kind of like, you can feed off it a little bit. And that's going to give you some strength. Now, we're going to press on a little bit here. We're going to go to 11, then we'll take a break. Use of props. The prop, if used, should be central to the story. The prop, if used, should be central to the story. So, my first sermon at Shelter Rock Church, I preached on Luke 8. And I was just visiting the church. I was not a candidate. But when I was on the candidating weekend, I was preaching on 1 Samuel 13 and 14. Now, I know none of you probably know that offhand. But this is when Jonathan and his armor bearer decide to take on the entire Philistine army. And Jonathan says, "Who is to say you, me, and the Lord can't take this on ourselves?" That's an amazing statement. Two of us, we can take on the entire Philistine army if God's with us. So I am at the church. This is Manhasset Baptist Church at the time. They have this plant on the side. Now, I'm taking this one here. This is not big enough. But they had one of these big plants that churches put on the stage to try to make it look nice. But they're always ugly because they're not real, kind of thing. And so after I said, so Jonathan is saying, "Who is to say, you, me, and the Lord do not go after the whole Philistine army? But where do we find Saul?" I walked over at the church that I have not been, but it's not my church. I grabbed one of their plants. I put it on the podium, and I say, "Where do we find Saul?" "He's perseverating under a pomegranate tree." "Oh, what are we going to do? The Philistine army is here. How are we going to handle this?" And all that kind of stuff. It was a little subtle thing to try to make a point happen. Jonathan, his son, is saying, "Who's to say who, me, and the Lord can't take on the whole army?" And his daddy, panicked, anxious, worried. And the little image of what I thought would be like a fake pomegranate tree, I thought would be helpful to make it pop. And I'm doing it for a couple reasons. One is I'm in the middle of my message. Some people are getting a little comfy. My wife always says this: "I'm fed, I'm warm." A lot of people come to church, they're too cozy. That's why sometimes we have the thermostat a little lower in church. We don't want people to be too comfortable. But if you have a prop of some sort, it should have some significant relevance to what you're going to use. Now, that being said, I want to point out many of us don't even bother to even think of using a prop in your story. And they can be, I mean, for example, let's say Frank is doing his elevator story about how he came to faith. And then in his story is somebody said, he tells a story, so I took my pen out and I wrote. And so he has a pen with him. So he takes his pen out and I wrote. It's part of his story. It's a little prop. It just happened to have it in his pocket. So he can use that prop to make that communication. Did you ever see My Cousin Vinny? A few of you, so there is this scene in which Vinny is trying to explain that what the prosecutor has just done makes it feel like they are for sure going to go to jail, that it is hopeless. And Vinny takes out of his wallet a credit card. And he says this, what the prosecution has done is made their case. And it looks like a very firm, solid brick. It looks like you're going to jail. But my job as a defense attorney is to turn it this way, and you see it's a shallow case. There's nothing to it at all. That little scene, using a credit card, makes that scene pop to realize that these guys who think they're going to jail and it's hopeless for something they didn't even do, no. There's somebody who can figure this out. There's going to be hope. There's going to be victory. And that would not be as effective if you were just describing a credit card. If you actually had the credit card, it's going to stand out and make a difference. Next one is, are you bored? Excuse me. Yeah, that's right. Are you bored with your own story or excited? Are you bored with your own story or excited? When you tell a story, do you want to be there? Do you want to be in the story? Do you want to be one of the characters? Do you believe in what you're saying? Does it come across like you believe in what you're saying? And that is going to make a big difference in how they are received and what is going on. This is a good thing to watch yourself. So we have a sister at the church in Manhasset, Jackie Kang, and she's one of our newer interns. She's always on the prayer team. Wonderful woman. She preached at Islip Presbyterian Church last week. And so I knew she was preaching there. I set it up. And so they filmed the sermon, and I get the chance to watch it afterwards. So I have it on my screen, and I took my phone and took a picture of her preaching on the screen, and I sent it to her. And she goes, oh my. Because she's like suddenly thinking, Pastor Steve is looking at my sermon from, Sunday. And I know she wants feedback. I know that. And she said it was so hard to watch herself preach. But the truth is, you learn so much. Now, she did very well. But one thing I gave her a suggestion on, if you look at the video, she had some nice illustrations. They became full stories, good things. But she never moved from where she stood. It was never. It was just always there. So I said, just you're moving over here to tell your story. And then you come back over here to make your points. And then you move over here to tell a different story. You're bringing engagement to the audience, and they're not feeling bored. And you're not looking bored. What is the quintessential boring teacher? It's the teacher who never moves, never has a voice inflection, doesn't get passionate or excited about anything. I was sharing, Nicole, was it? Telling you about my high school teacher. And so I had this social studies teacher that I absolutely loved from Walt Whitman High School. And I remember the first day of class. Now, I'm old now, and I'm remembering being in 11th grade in his class. And he says, they put me up here, at the highest classroom in the school to keep me away from the others so I don't infect them with my doctrines and philosophies. At that moment, I'm like, ooh, what is he going to say? I was so fascinated by that. And, fast forward, 50 years, and I look him up when he's in Ormond Beach, Florida, and by God's grace, I was visiting Ormond Beach, Florida at the time, and I just felt the Spirit of God, lead me to speak to him. And we ended up being friends for the last 5 years of his life, hanging out together every time I was in Florida. But that image of remembering always what that teacher did, which is a great exercise, by the way, think to yourself, who are the people in school that you remember? What did those teachers do? How did they say it? How did they convey it? And I don't mean the ones that embarrassed you and made you feel shameful. There's a few of those out there too. I'm meaning the ones that talked in a way that you were engaged. You came into the story. So my brother Mark very correctly ascertained that this is a prop. And Mike Ayala, who comes to the Syosset campus and sits always in that seat right there, he is a contractor, builds houses, makes modifications, things like that. And I knew I was going to be preaching a passage which talked about a yoke. And so I said, do you think you could make one for me? And I had no idea he was going to make one of this caliber. It was quite amazing. So then I preached on it with this, but then I'm teaching my class on Jeremiah. And in Jeremiah 27, the Lord tells him, Jeremiah, buy a yoke. And what is he supposed to do with this yoke? He's supposed to go to a conference where the king of Israel has invited all these other kings, and the king of Israel is trying to encourage them all to have kind of like a protest against Babylon. And so Jeremiah comes to the conference, as the scripture says, like this, wearing the yoke. And I mean, would you say this would stand out when Jeremiah is telling his story? I think most assuredly it would stand out. And the whole point is you are not to yoke yourself together against Babylon, for this is not what the Lord. Then he goes, thus says the Lord, and he tells his story. But just imagining walking around with a yoke is hard to even get your head around. What would that look like? But when the teacher is coming in like this and suddenly says, whoa, that stands out, you realize, that really makes this passage pop in terms of what's going on. And eventually a false prophet smashes his yoke because he's wanting to make another point. But in all and through all, when you see the power of a good prop, it can be very, very useful. Now, I've made the expression that Jeremiah uses props at least 4 times. He has to bury a belt. At another point, he, as obviously makes a yoke. These kinds of things give me license when I preach to use props. And so I figured if it's good enough for Jeremiah, it's good enough for me too. And I think the world is filled with too much boring preaching, that anything we can do to raise the bar in our storytelling, we want to do. So our next point is this, and that is, why are you telling the story? So the next point is the point. Why are you telling the story? What is it about this particular story that you're wanting your son or daughter to walk away with? And this can be when you're telling someone else's story too. My wife's choice to tell my children the story of the Lord of the Rings, which is a massive undertaking. Have you seen, the length of the book? It's long. But she felt that reading these stories would help them understand life. in terms of reading the Chronicles of Narnia, which are very easy to read, 7 books. They tell you about life. I think I was talking to my sister Ruth, might have been yesterday, and I made reference to a little line in the Chronicles of Narnia where Aslan says to the character Lucy, we can never know what might have been, only know what will be. And that's life. You know, do you ever wonder what would have happened if I married that person instead of this person? We have these thoughts, and sometimes they're just in our head. You don't even want to say them out loud, but we think them. And then this book that C.S. Lewis writes points it out. When Michelle read the Chronicles of Narnia to our kids, it's because these are not just books. They are books that help us understand a little bit more about God, a little bit more about life. And they do it in a fun and an adventuresome way. And so what's your point? Your point is, I'm telling this story because I want to achieve this particular goal. This past weekend, I took my one child who is currently choosing not to walk with the Lord. Good kid, just doesn't consider herself a Christian right now. And I said, but she loves me dearly. And I said, would you come to see the Jesus Revolution with me? And she said, I will, because she loves me. You know, she's going to come see the movie. It's a story. I want her to see this story because, number one, it's a fun story to watch. There's a cute love story in it. It tells a true event of how the Jesus People movement started. But there's another reason, is because this story may be an instrument to draw her back to Jesus. I don't know that, but I'm going to be part of that story. So when you think of what stories do you want to tell, what are they? And I think every one of us should have some go-to stories. Like, see if anyone can guess this here. What is one of Pastor Steve's favorite stories to tell about his life? Anyone? Say it again. Train, that's good, but that's kind of a general statement, you know. Yeah, I like to tell train stories, it's true. The primary one that caused all my kids to roll their eyes every time Daddy was telling the story again, it was when God healed my heart, where I was diagnosed with myocarditis. The doctor said I might need a heart transplant, and 5 days later, everything's gone and everything's whole. And I tell that story over and over and over again, ad nauseum. But it's because, for me, it was that story. Now, if you were the Apostle Paul, what does he tell over and over and over again? I was on the Damascus Road when I suddenly saw this light. And I heard this voice saying, Paul, it's hard for you to kick against the goads. Who are you, Lord? He tells it to kings. He tells it to average people. It's his story that he tells. You can come up with this, circle this idea, point. What are some of the points of your life that are worth preserving? Now, I want you to think of another thing. People ask, what is it like to move, to another part of the country? It has many gifts associated with it. One of the gifts associated with it is you get to say you're sorry to some people that you should have said you're sorry to years ago. It's you get to tell I love you to some people that you haven't had the chance to say I love you. We have this precious sister in Manhasset. Her name is Mary Lilia. She's 92 years old. God has blessed her with wonderful health. And she says, Pastor Steve, I made your wife promise that every time you come back to town, you need to take me out to lunch. But now that I am, taking off, I give Mary Lilia extra hugs because she's special. She's precious to me, over the years of ministering. I had this talk yesterday that I gave to our seniors, and my brother Mark was there. And I just had to celebrate Mark because I have been so blessed by this man over the years. And you know what? Moving causes me to remember I want to celebrate Mark. I was telling Frank here, I love this brother Frank. He's only attended this church for a few years. He's in his mid-80s, and he started serving almost immediately. I want you to look in the mirror and say, if I'm in my mid-80s, will I be serving immediately? A lot of us are like, let the young people did that. I had my share. But not Frank and Joanne. You know, they dove in immediately. So you have a moment to reflect, what are the stories now, before I'm dying, before I'm moving, that I want these people in my life to know? And so your kids should know your stories about when God did particular things in your life. And if you're going to tell the story, tell it well. This brings us to the next. Simplicity. Does your story have rabbit trails? Are you going off, on some trail? Now, I will grant you, if anyone has heard me teach my Bible class, I thrive on rabbit trails. But if you're going to be in a rabbit trail, it better be a good one. It better be funny, serious, whatever, great. But if you're telling a short story, you don't want rabbit trails to take away from the point. So there's a cute little movie, Finding Nemo, which has a great example of this.
Hey, tell us a joke.
Yeah, come on, give us a funny one.
Well, actually, that's a common misconception. Clownfish are no funnier than any other fish.
Ah, come on, Cloudy.
Yeah, do something funny.
Yeah. All right, I know one joke. There's a mollusk, see, and he walks up to a sea. Well, he doesn't walk up, he swims up. Well, actually, the mollusk isn't moving. He's in one place, and then the sea cucumber, well, I'm mixed up. There was a mollusk and a sea cucumber. Then the sea cucumber looks over the mollusk and says, with fronds like these, who needs anemone?
Obviously, we're not talking about Zootopia here, so. I love that little scene, though, because it's just like, it drifts off to nowhere. It's like, what were you trying to say? And have you ever been in a situation where somebody's telling a story, and you know the story yourself, but you know this person's telling it badly? And you kind of want to jump into the story and say, no, what happened next was, and then you like continue the line. What you're wanting to do is have a story that has that beginning, middle, and end. And if you have a rabbit trail in there, that is not going to contribute to the effectiveness of telling the story. Take that rabbit trail out and stick to the point, because you'll have a better story. There is a principle, by the way, of preaching, which is if you have a short sermon, you might think, oh, this is great, nobody will be bored. No, some of the most boring sermons I've ever heard have been very short. For example, I visit St. Mary's sometimes in Manhasset. The homily's 8 minutes long, and I am shocked that a priest can be capable of boring us in just 8 minutes' time. And yet I can listen to a 45-minute sermon, well-crafted, in which I'm on the edge of my seat, like that Alistair Begg one. You made it! You made it! And I'm like, oh yeah, what's going to happen next? And it has nothing to do with length. It has to do with, are you telling it well? That's what it really comes down to. So this next one is this resolution. Do you have a nice, clean ending, or is it muddled? The man on the middle cross said I could come. You couldn't get cleaner than that. It's like perfect ending. Many of our stories, so like when I'm telling my heart story, and I say, and God, said, I always end the immediate heart story is the doctor said this to me: you could go home and run the marathon, and I could not medically tell you not to. Like, okay, I'm well. The doctor says I'm well. I could go run the marathon. So that's a nice ending to my heart story. But if I'm going to tell the little longer version, it is, so I'm thinking to myself, maybe God's reminding me that I need to go into ministry. But I still don't have any money. I mean, just because I came out of a heart crisis doesn't mean I can now afford seminary. And 2 months later, I went home to New York on Thanksgiving. And after dinner, a relative comes up to me and says, "Did you ever want to go to seminary?" I said, "Yeah, I did, but it's kind of expensive." "Well, the Lord told me, if you go, I'm supposed to pay for it." I said, "Do you have any idea what it costs?" The person said, "About $35,000, and I'm including books." Okay, end of the story. It punches. You know, they ask a question. Did you ever want to go to seminary? That's kind of the lead in. The middle part is me saying, yeah, but it's really expensive. The climax is, I'll pay for it. Wow. Short story, but it has a nice, clean ending. And, you know, you can take these as far as you want. You know, what happened next, you know. But that gives you an ability to, you know, give a concise story, to know where you're going and how does it end. What is the conclusion? So here we continue. Is your story relevant to the audience? So, Keisha, you're in children's ministry. Actually, you did youth group last night. So, Keisha is with the youth kids, and she says, well, you know, I care for a senior citizen, and one of the things, he likes to read old Reader's Digests. And so sometimes I read a Reader's Digest to him to comfort him. Now, high school kids, he's talking to a senior citizen, talking about a job which seems like not really much relevance to where I am, and then talks about a magazine that these kids have never heard of in their life. It is like completely useless. I was talking to Ruth yesterday, and we were talking about Hilltop, which is a senior group, and we were saying who would be good speakers for this group. And I was mentioning some younger people, and she was concerned, would the younger people have something to say of interest to the older people? It's possible. It is possible, but not necessarily. And so know your audience, because it communicates how you're going to speak. My most challenging audience I ever had to tell a story to was in Mozambique, where I was going to preach in English. It was going to be translated into Portuguese and translated again into Kiwani. 2 translations, one sermon. And I realized, and they didn't want me going longer than like 30 minutes. Well, that means the fact that everything I'm saying is repeated twice means I better have a very short story as to what is going to be done. And in that case, I thought to myself, I'm just going to tell one story and have this punchline and add all these other things, because I'm trying to reach this community. But I also have to speak to a people that have no electric, that while I am preaching, 2 women are breastfeeding with no shirt. And I'm like, this is not my world. I am like, you know, and I asked the missionary, how do I do this in your world? Probably my most challenging surprise event, I was in Mongolia. And Duya was there, and Jargal, and Jargal says, hey, there are children playing by the river. Let's give them literature and candy, you know, about receiving Christ. I said, great. And so the kids, they're very poor. They were just swimming in their underwear, and there are about 20 of them there. And then Jargal says, hey, let's preach the gospel to them. And I said, great, I'd love to see how you do it. And he gathers the kids together, and he says, okay, Steve, preach. Jargal, I don't speak Mongolian. And he goes, no problem, I translate. And I say to Jargal, you don't speak English. How do you translate? I figure it out. So with 10-second notice, he wants me to preach in another culture, to kids, another generation, about Jesus, when I have no measurements whatsoever of knowing this culture. How do I respond? What do I do? So it's one of those moments I said, Lord, help me now. Help me now. And so what happened is a train went by in the background. And so I said to the kids, see that train? And all the kids turn around and look at the train. And what happened then is I worked for the railroad. Talk about railroad illustrations. And trains are always going someplace, just like our lives. Where is your life going? Some of us are going, and eventually you can take that train that leads to heaven. And I needed to be so simple so Jargle, who barely knows any English, can translate. But I also wanted to cross this generation. But kids, they see the train every day. I figured, okay, they can talk about this. I'm not saying I did this perfectly, but I'm trying to get through to an audience that I really don't have that connection to. And so think about who you're talking. Are you talking to a bunch of friends? Are you talking to seniors? Are you talking to kids? Are you talking to strangers? All those kinds of things make a difference. You know your audience? Big difference. Here's a speaker who came to the Leadership Summit and spoke in Japan. And after she gave her talk with a translation, she said, are there any questions? And the translator said, yes, what was your question? And the speaker's like, they didn't raise a hand. And then after that question was answered, the translator goes, yes. And the speaker's totally baffled. Nobody's raising their hand. How do you know this? And so it's a Japanese cultural distinctive of what she called bright eyes. In other words, the person who looks up, opens their eyes up, is the one who has the question. That's a cultural thing. You either know that or you don't know that. But in our world, we can bridge this gap. I'm a fire chaplain for the Manhasset Lakeville Fire Department. I don't speak to them the way I speak to people in Manhasset Church. It's different. Number one, 100% of them are Catholic. And so I'm going to think in terms of how they're responding in their Catholic world. 100% of them were deeply moved and affected by 9/11. They're aware of that. These little things that help me bridge to that audience, I want to be conscious of. Now, moving to a different area, and that is principles of story discovery. In other words, you want to tell a story, and you're wondering, how do I come up with the story? Now, one method, very simply, is you read somebody else's book, The Lord of the Rings. That's great. And that is a very powerful way to tell a story. I am always recommending people to read the Chronicles of Narnia at any age. And the reason is because I think these books can be redeeming to you in terms of growing you into the man, woman, child you want to be. And so I say it. So you can discover a story that you want to tell that someone else wrote. But what I find, if I am needing to add a story to my sermon, I go for a walk. And I just talk openly with the Lord. I said, Lord, what would you have me say? Do you know of anything that, might be helpful? Remind me of a book I read. Remind me of, an internet site I saw. So a walk for me, I'm not saying all these things are going to be helpful for everyone here, but for me, very helpful. The second is, look at a bookshelf. Books are wonderful doorways into adventures. So one of the reasons I have a lot of books in my office is when I am stumped, I just look at my bookshelf and I go, And I pull this one book out and I'm like, yeah, I remember this. And because I was going to say preparing for a devotional for the staff. And I'm like, I'm dry, Lord. I got nothing. And I feel a little prompting. Look at your bookshelf, Steve. And I look and I remember that was a good story. And now I have a devotional. Now I know where I'm going. So take a walk, look at a bookshelf, go through photos. This is a very simple thing. You know, they say a picture has 1,000 words. Well, it's true. I'm having a fun time right now because I'm moving. I don't want to take my parents' photo albums with me. I mean, it's like vast. So I took 300 pictures 2 days ago of my parents' photo albums. Page, snap, page, snap, page, snap. So now I have the pictures, but I don't have to carry the photo albums with me. But you know as well as me, you hit certain pictures and you're like, aw. You know, isn't that, like I saw like Michelle when we first started dating, my father took the picture. I'm like, aw, you know, it is cute, you know, and when you see this, suddenly things pop into your mind when you see a picture and you're reminded of something. The next is read books. So some of you have heard the rebuke I received in 2008. I'm driving to a prayer conference, and this church, he like helps churches like get better. His name was Dave Miles. You might remember Mark, but Dave Miles asked me while we were driving, "Do you read much, Steve?" And I said, "Not as much as I'd like." And he said, "I thought so. I can tell from your preaching." I'm like, "Ooh, I've just been rebuked," and I didn't question him. It was true. So I said, Dave, what do you think I should do? He said, I think you should read more, but the way you read more is go to school again. It forces you to read. So he is the one who encouraged me to get my doctorate. He said, you already have the best job on earth. You don't need the doctorate. But what you need is to read. And when you get a doctorate, you'll have to read 30 books a year. It's just going to force you to read. So he was right. And I started reading because I got my doctorate. And so if you're not in the habit of reading, which I would say that's generally me, are there people in your life that can inspire you to read? Like, what are you reading? Maybe we can read it together. Maybe we can be in a book club. The funny thing about reading, whether the book is something you don't like or something you like, you can talk about it. And so you have a story. So my wife said, this is not a book, it's a story, but while she's living in Vegas by herself, she got herself a movie pass where she can go to Regal theaters as many times as she wants for, I don't know, $60 or something. And she talked about, I'm going to go see Shazam, the new Shazam that came out. And I was like, that's an awful movie. And it's like, and so we're going, I didn't like Shazam. Why? Is because on the one hand, it's funny and comical, and on the other hand, it has grotesque killings. And I'm like, I don't want to see grotesque killings in my funny comedy. I just don't want to see that. And so she says, well, here's a good thing, Steve. You don't have to go. I'm going by myself, you know, in Nevada. But here's the thing. I didn't like the movie, but I can talk about it. I can tell a story about the movie because I had input coming in. In the same way, when you are giving yourself more input through books, you now have the ability to tell more stories. Next one, interview interesting people. Interview interesting people. What are their stories that they have that can help you like grow in your own ability of stories? I'm going to pick on my sister Ruth for a moment, but I've known Ruth the entire time I've been at this church, the entire time. At first, when I met her, I was scared of her because she's a New Yorker. She tells you what she thinks. You know, that's a distinctive of New York. They tell you what they think. When I was being interviewed here, I was interviewed by like all the women in the church, all the women leaders. One of the women told me, shut up, we've heard enough from you. Let's hear from your wife. The future senior pastor just told me to shut up, you know. But the thing is, New Yorkers don't mince words. No, she did not. But what I'm bringing up with what you said, Ruth, is that over the last year or two, I've learned things about Ruth on a personal level. Meaning she's told me some of her stories. And now it's interesting. So like we see each other again, I say, whatever happened with that? And she can tell me the rest of the story, if you will. But in your life, I actually think heaven, the reason why there's no marriage in heaven, according to Jesus, I think it's because when you have eternity, you can spend lifetimes with different people and get to know them and what was their journey, what was their experience. And to hear that, to me, I wait with bated breath to learn the different stories that are around. Take the time to discover those stories. Adds to great storytelling. Now, this is the next story techniques. Story techniques. The principle of pull up a rock. Pull up a rock. Now, I didn't come up with this term. I grabbed it from somebody. It's a church in California called North Coast, and there was a seminar on preaching. And this is what he means by pull up a rock. You're telling the story of, let's say, David and Goliath. But instead of telling it the traditional way, and then David was sent by his father to bring provisions to his brothers. And when he got there, he sees this giant, and the giant said, ... You tell the story. But pull up a rock, now you are in the story, and look who's coming here now. Is that David? Are the sheep being mean to you, David? We're here defending our land, but you... In other words, here's pull up a rock. The guy on the rock doesn't know what happened with Jesse when Jesse said, go and get your brother some provisions. He only knows what he sees, and what he sees is this young lad coming in, and so we hear the story from the guy on the rock, which means he's missing some things, but he sees things that we wouldn't normally see. He sees what David's wearing. Oh, you brought your slingshot with you. Oh, you must feel so brave. You can develop it, build it, and you're in the story. And what happens is a story that you've heard 100 times suddenly pops because you're telling it in a new way, in a way that's really drawing people into it. I've done this a few times with doing when you dress up in a costume, and particularly like Christmas Eve, I would dress up as one of the shepherds and talk about, and we just had this experience of these angels came. We're not sure what to do with it. Some of my friends say we should try to go and check out the town. It's not that far away. And, I'm telling it not from the perspective of the, Mary and Joseph. I'm telling it from the perspective of this one shepherd who only has this much information, but he has enough. Glory to God in the highest and peace on earth to men. What does that mean? So we were talking about it. And eventually, after we saw the baby, we went into town. Some people call us the first missionaries. I never thought of myself that way. I'm just a shepherd. But I suppose they're right. Have you heard about Jesus? And that pull up a rock model is so effective for taking a story that has been told over and over and over again. Again, Alistair Begg. The angel. You made it. He's telling the story from the angel's perspective. That's brilliant. We all know the thief on the cross story. And this day you shall be with me in paradise. But we never thought of it from the greeters in glory. So by telling it from another story, which is then again, pull up a rock, it's making that pop. Discovery of props. Now what I mean by this, yeah, that's right. Discovery of props is the next one. How do you know if a prop is worth? So you read the story in the Bible, let's say, or even in your own life, and you say, is this prop worthy? Just ask the question. Is this worthy of a prop? And so I think of, when we go before God and he's going to assess, can we go into heaven? So John MacArthur tells a story of being on an airplane. So he gets on an airplane in LA and he's going to Phoenix. And he is sitting next to a man, and the man looks Middle Eastern. And John MacArthur has his Bible open, and he's reading it. And the man says, "Excuse me, is that your Bible?" "Yes, it is." He said, Are you a Christian?" "Yes, I am." He said, "Do you mind if I ask you a question? I'm Islamic. Do you believe in Christianity having sins? In other words, does Christianity teach that there's something called sin?" And John MacArthur says, "Yes, it does. That there is a right and a wrong." And John MacArthur says to the Islamic man, "Tell me, does Islam have sin?" And the man says, "Oh, we have lots of sin. In fact, I am flying to Phoenix right now to sin." And it turned out that he had an affair with a woman that was there, and he was going there. And he said, "Well, let me ask you a question." He said, "When you go before the great God, how are you going to justify yourself going into his heaven?" He said, "Oh, I just hope that the good things I have done have outweighed the bad things I have done." And John MacArthur said, "I know God. I know God, and he can't have any imperfection with him." And the man says, "You know God? You know the God? You're sitting in the middle seat on Southwest Airlines and you claim to know God?" And, that was his punchline. But then he gets to the point of, you're saved by grace and grace alone. And that is the whole principle of Christianity. Now, John, when he tells his story, he has zero props. That's not his thing. But what he is doing is he's creating word pictures that bring you onto the plane. Virtually every single person has been in an airplane. And for those of us who've been in an airplane, know what the middle seat is like. And you're picturing when he says he's reading his Bible, what you're imagining is the tray table is down, the Bible is open. We are there. And then when they say Southwest Airlines, ooh, I've waited online there. I've done, before you know it, he has created mental props that now we're in this story with him, and it's drawing us in. But that would be your use of words. But what you can also do in telling your story is actually have an example of what that might look like. The next is amplification. Is your voice audible enough? Or, very simple, I'm using a mic here so people can hear me. But it's not just that. There are times when you want to whisper. Remember when God came to Elijah and there was a fire, but God was not on the fire. And there was lightning and God was not on the lightning. And there was a windstorm and God was not on the windstorm. And there was an earthquake. But then he was in the still, small voice. You have caused everyone to listen in because of your amplification. If you are just one level in talking, it just sounds droning. But when you use your voice, it now becomes, again, powerful. Lighting. Too dark, too light, just right. What is that? I had a funny dream last night. Weird dream. So I'm done preaching, and there are people who have come up to pray. And in my dream, I go to the back where the light switches are and turn the lights on bright. Jack Crabtree, in my dream, goes back and turns the lights softer because he is dealing with people who are praying, bearing their souls, and light is not helpful at this moment. Now, is that a weird preacher dream or what? It's just about lighting. But I think I see that. And you can see it too. Why is it that, like at the Tuesday night prayer meeting, we don't put on the fluorescent lights because we're wanting people to be kind of with the Lord. We don't want them to get distracted by everything that's going on. And so you make a more subdued lighting. This is one of those things that people just don't think about. And here's another one, finding a partner. Some stories are best told with more than one person. And so you kind of work it, and it becomes kind of like a drama. Could that be helpful? Maybe. But you think about it. Now, here's the last point I want to tell you, and that is what I call 3-story evangelism. This was taught to me by Jack Crabtree. He said everyone who's come to Christ, have a story about how you came to Christ. It doesn't have to be dramatic, it just has to be true. So for me, I tell the story. I was 5 years old. My brother was reading me a little tract, a gospel pamphlet, and when he got to the punchline, do you want to become a Christian? I said to my brother, yes, I do. He panicked. He went to my mother, and she came in. She prayed with me, and I became a Christian. I think it was genuine, but it was when I was 16 that I realized that the faith of my parents is now my faith. All right, I just gave you my testimony very, very quickly. What did that take? 34 seconds, something very brief. You have a story. Master your gospel story. Now, the person you're talking to also has a story. Now, they might not have a gospel story, but they have a story. You say, tell me about yourself. What are like things that stick out yourself? Well, I was raised just by my mom. And, if it wasn't for my mom, I wouldn't have gone anywhere. But you know what? There was this man down the road that really saw something in me, and he inspired me. And because of him, really, I'm a doctor today. Because of that guy, they have a story. But you know who also has a story? God. And his story is he loved you so much that he saved me, and he wants to save you. It's the intersection of these 3 stories that is the 3-story evangelism. You have a story, you master it. You can master your gospel story. Get it down, get it straight. Your friend, whoever you're talking to, has a story. It could have rabbit trails because they're not prepared for it, but they have a basic thrust. But then God has a story, and you're able to say, the reason I wanted to talk to you is because I have found in my own journey, God, it's been really real to me. And I just sense that He would be really real to you. And maybe you can, have that moment. So what I wanted to do to wrap up is have a little fun by telling you a story sermon. And I am going to give you the abbreviated version of this, but it was one of these moments in my life where I was riveted. Now, I have listened to this sermon maybe 3 times in my life. It's not like I've listened to it a lot, but it was so impactful that even though I heard it in 1994, I still remember the gist of it. Now, the guy spoke for like 40 minutes. I'm speaking for 10, so you can know you're going to get the abbreviated version of this. But I want you to hear it because this is storytelling at its best, in my view. The preacher's name was Dr. E.V. Hill. And the place where I heard it was the Moody Bible Institute, and it was the pastor's summit. And E.V. Hill comes to the podium wearing a completely all-white suit. And he just stands there, and with his deep voice, he projected this. When was God at his best? When did the great God exceed all expectations? Well, clearly, it was when He created the heavens and the earth. I mean, would you imagine it with me? At the spoken word of God, stars, galaxies come to existence that we can't even see or experience. And we look up and stand in awe at the sky. And then He created maybe the crown jewel of all its creation, this beautiful earth. Have you ever traveled? Have you ever seen? He created the East Coast. with its lush green forests and rolling hills and beautiful coastline. He created the middle part of our country with its fertile soil. You could plant anything and it grows and it feeds us and takes care of us. He created the Rocky Mountains with its beauty and grandeur and the storehouse of water for all over. And then he created California, and he decided to live there. He was from California. God at his best. No. God was at his best when he formed from the earth, from mud, people, you and I. Have you paused for a moment to look at the complexity of your body? The wonder, the majesty of what is going on? I mean, everything you see, incredible. God, at his best, creating people. That was pretty good, I will admit. It wasn't his best. You know when God was at his best? It was in a place called Ur of the Chaldees. When he found this guy minding his own business, his name was Abraham. And he says, you are going to be the father of a nation. And Abraham says, I can't even have any children. Abraham, look at the stars. Can you count them? Abraham, look at the sand of the sea. Can you count it? But you are going to be the father of a nation that outnumbers these. How could that be? But God called a people, not because they were great, but because they were precious to him. God at its best, when he called a people unto himself and said, you are mine, I am yours. It was pretty good, I will admit. But no, that wasn't his best. God was at his best when he came to a young virgin and said, you are going to conceive a child. And the God of all creation, who spoke the worlds into existence, slips into this world in an impoverished couple in a manger. And then the angels, they had to sing. In fact, some have argued that it is a protest. They said, you can't come into the world with nobody celebrating, nobody worshiping. And so they said, glory to God on the highest and peace on earth to all men in whom his favor rests. They just had to celebrate because God at his best, living, dwelling among us. I will say that was pretty good, but it wasn't his best. No, God was at his best when Jesus began his ministry. When he saw that woman in need and bleeding for 12 years and he heals her. When he looks out and sees the 5,000 who look like sheep without a shepherd and he feeds them and teaches them. When he sees the widow of Nain coming out and she's going to bury her son, her only son. And he comes and interrupts the funeral and heals that child, raises him from the dead. God at his best, living with us, feeding us, teaching us, loving us. How can you match that? That was good. It was good. But it wasn't his best. His best came on a Friday night. Mary is weeping. Her son is dying, nailed to a cross. And you and I know the significance of that because as his blood shed, I became clean. I became holy. As God was holding back the 10,000 angels ready to sweep down and bring justice that we truly deserved, he was dying for us and loving us. God at his best, giving his life for you and for me. Yeah, that was good. But it wasn't his best. It was early Sunday morning. Mary goes to the tomb. She wants to put spices on her Lord's body. She gets there. Tomb's empty. There's some angelic figure saying he's not here. He is risen, but but what does that mean? Where is he? Is he alive? Who are you? Are you a figment of my imagination? She goes back with the other disciples, and John and Peter, they have a foot race. John wins the race, but Peter, he goes into the grave, and he sees the cloth there, and then that day, they're in behind the locked room, and Jesus stands among them. And he, look at my hands, look at my side. And it was Thomas who said, my Lord and my God. Death is conquered. We have victory over death. God at his best. Now at this point, the audience at Moody is like, amen. I mean, we are like so into it. And he said, that was amazing. That was unbelievable. But that wasn't his best. Now I want you to pause for a moment and think, how do you top that? Where do you go? And he said, no, I'll tell you when God was at his best. It was in 1947 in Seguin, Texas, on September 9th, when he saved an 11-year-old boy. God at his best. Now, at that moment, everyone in that auditorium remembered when they met Jesus. It had nothing to do with Seguin, Texas for me. For me, it was Schiller Avenue in Huntington Station when my brother read to me. For someone else, it was at a camp. It was your mom or your dad, or it was a Sunday school class. What Evie Hill did was to tell a story that brought me to the wonder of who God is in all different ways. Now, mind you, he spoke for 40 minutes, and he had it crafted. I'm just doing it because as I remember it, but he had it crafted when he described the heavens, when he described the creation of our circulatory systems, when he brought it. But the punchline caught us off guard. We all knew leading into this message that it's going to get to Calvary. And if it isn't Calvary, it's going to be the resurrection. We all knew this. You know it's going there. And then when it wasn't, we're all caught off guard. Like, where in the world are you going, man? And then when he said what he said, and we were all cut to the heart, you know what we had to do after that? We just broke into 2s and 3s and thanked God for our salvation. That's all we did. We couldn't do anything else. We just had to kind of like cry before the Lord and say, thank you. Thank you. This is the power of good storytelling, divinely given to you and I by the master storyteller who is telling this unfolding story of God loving humanity so much that he gave his only son. And whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. And now I want to tell this story well to my children, to my church, to my friend on the train, to wherever I find myself. So it's worth being good storytellers, because all we're doing is mirroring the master storyteller, our Savior. Let's pray. Father, we thank you. We've had a few minutes to talk about storytelling today. And each of us have a different context in which we might tell stories. Sometimes it's about reading a story to somebody. Sometimes it's about coming up with a story. Sometimes it's just relating something that happened in our lives. But I'm praying, Father, that because we spent a few minutes here, that we might craft some stories that draw people to you. And Father, as I think of how we began with Alistair Begg saying, the man on the middle cross said I could come, and how we end with E.V. Hill saying, it was in Seguin, Texas, September 9th, 1947, when God saved an 11-year-old boy. Father, we're here. This is us. It's our story. We pray, Father, that you would help us by your Spirit to tell stories that bring others to meet you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.